The awareness of God's presence. Genesis 28 verse 16. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." John Piper says, "I think the first thing I should say is that the biblical writers were not naive, in the sense that they thought God had a body with spatial dimensions so that he could have locality in the universe. When we speak about the presence of God, we must never think that the omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent God is confined to any location, such as a church, a specific mountain, a temple, or any other place. With the exemption of 2 instances in the Bible, God does not limit his presence to any specific human arena. The first instance is the tabernacle of Moses. God chose it to be the epicenter of his manifested presence in the life of Israel. And Jesus Christ is the second time we saw God being locally located. For in Christ, all the fullness of the deity lives in bodily form. Colossians 2 verse 9. He became Emmanuel, God with us. Outside of those 2 exemptions, we should never think God is physically confined to a locality. The truth is made clear in that the Most High does not dwell in houses made by hands. Acts 7 verse 48. The term used for presence in the Bible is often panem or pane. This is a very pregnant term. Though it is a noun, it is often translated in a verb form. It means face or faces, as in the face of a person. So concerning the presence of God, it connotates the seeing of his face, never to be perceived as a face with eyes, noses, and mouth, but in a more figurative sense. It is to take this end that David says, "For you make him most blessed forever. You make him glad with the joy of your presence." Psalm 21 verse 6. The terms used are also speaking about God's attention, or God turning to face us. David often cries for his attention, for the face of God to be turned toward him. Throughout the Psalms we hear him saying, "Hear my cry. Give ear to my cry. I have sought your face. I have beheld your beauty." The psalm understood this metaphoric language fully well and set his poetry in place as a potent expression of this reality. It is therefore a tragedy of the worst kind when we are in God's presence and we are not aware of it. Jacob found himself in this predicament. "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it," he remorsefully expressed. He wasn't unaware that God is omnipresent and is everywhere. God occupies every space in the universe. Our finite mind cannot currently grasp the fullness of God as omnipresent. Yet we should be comforted by this phenomenon. We cannot go to a place in creation where God does not exist. David again is clear on this in Psalm 193, verse 7 to 10. "Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. We must live with this always resting on our consciousness. Our God permeates the heavens and heaven, hell, the seas, the caves, the crevices in the rocks, the craters on the moon, the circumference of the sun, and to the core of all stars and planets, discovered and veiled. God cannot be outrun or escaped. Jacob was fully aware of that, but what had evaded his awareness was that the manifested and active presence of God was where he had made his bed to take his rest. That is the tragedy. We too have missed opportunities to see God's face because we weren't aware that his presence was where we were. Like Jacob, we may be more mentally focused on who we are fleeing from than who is with us every step of the way. Life has a way of capturing our attention with its many cares, and this robs us of the benefits of being aware of God's face turned towards us. We are pulled in many directions and called to divide our attention among our marriages, our businesses or jobs, our health and staying alive, our children, our studies, our ministries, and so much more. These things are important, but they grate on our minds, causing us to be less conscious of God's manifested presence. Jacob's words express astonishment that Jehovah should have manifested himself in a place remote from his father's home, to himself a solitary wanderer. Cambridge Bible for Schools and Colleges Commentary. Listen, God is no more in your church than he is where you are right now. We often think that God is in this place or that place, then he is in our homes, offices, grocery stores, or football stadia. That is not so. Sometimes we think he is more present at the altar than he is in the pews. That is not so. Whether we are kneeling or standing at the altars of our churches or our bedsides, he is present. If we go to the seaside, God is there. His manifested presence is there. We may believe that God is not going to manifest his spiritual benefits in our lives because of who we are. And again, this robs us because we will not be aware. God desires for every human being, regardless of stature, significance, sobriety, or social state, to live in full awareness of his presence. You and I need to embrace this truth and tune our minds to this level of awareness. We are never alone. It doesn't matter how remote the place may be. We are never alone. The presence of God Shekinah with us is even more evident in the new covenant. Jesus constantly reassured his disciples that God would be with them, and they will never be relegated to an orphanage because God has left them alone. We are always in the house of the Lord and at the gate of heaven in this dispensation. Even greater is that we are currently seated in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. As a matter of fact, as children of God, heaven has invaded earth on our behalf. If we do not embrace these realities and live with this awareness, we miss so much of what God is doing for us every day. The Hebrew term used for know in our text speaks of having more than a mental or intellectual perception of God's presence. It is an experiential knowledge of our nearness to God. Piper states, "Our experience of it means that we taste or feel or realize the reality of God more directly, more authentically, more intimately, more effectively, that is, producing more effects in our lives, more certainly, more satisfyingly, or more terrifyingly, and so on. God must be experienced daily in everything that we do and everywhere that we go. He is with us. We must experience Him more directly. We also need to be aware that God is constantly influencing our world. John Piper cites Psalm 114 verse 7 and 8 in explaining God's presence in the earth. "Tremble, O earth, at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the God of Jacob, who turns the rock into a pool of water, the flint into a spring of water." Imagine how awestruck we would be knowing that God is actively influencing the world even if we do not experience His influence. It is the answer to the proverbial existential riddle, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it make a sound? Whether we are experiencing God's presence of influence, we must be aware that He is present. This awareness will make us glad.